weather in Anaheim and decent weather in Oakland, and then there was a dome stadium in Seattle. And by the time we got done with that opening road trip, we'd come back, and we would wonder, we'd be watching and wonder at that point in time what the weather was going to be like the opening day. And for people that have been following this, the Twins, a long time, they'll remember the Calvin effect. Everybody laughs about it, but sure enough, opening day would come along. There would have been snow the week before, and it'd be 75 and sunny on opening day on April 15th. It happened more times than not, and so I always kind of felt like we lucked out because of the way they did the schedule. We played in warmer places other than Minnesota for a lot in April, so it wasn't as bad as opening day here this year, March 28th, has potential to be.
Brutal. They should be opening in a dome or a warm weather city. It makes me crazy. From Pat Barrett, is closer the Twins' biggest need to a successful season, and if not, what is?
It's a great question, and how to put this? The biggest need for the Twins is not closer. The biggest need for the Twins is for all the veteran guys, all the guys that have, done it before, to still be those guys. So Jonathan Scope, Nelson Cruz, be who you've been at your best. And I don't mean career year, but just what you do. Be who, we think you are. And Eddie Rosario, be what you've done. Right. I mean, so that's the most important thing. Along with now the young guys, Buxton, Kepler, Polanco, take the next step and be who we think you're going to be at some point in time when we're looking at guys like Nelson Cruz. Be those guys. If everybody plays the way they can play and where we expect them to play. And I'll say the same thing, Jose Barrios, be that guy that you've been. Kyle Gibson, be the guy that has been terrific for the last, full baseball season and then some. If those kinds of things happen, then closer becomes less of an issue. But if those kind of things don't happen, closer is not going to matter so much. So, Miguel Sano, come back and be the player we're hoping it to be. So, the thing that's going to derail the Twins probably will be less about closing the game and more about those guys playing the way they have played or should play. And if you have too many oops in the lineup or on the mound, and guys, performance isn't what you're expecting, then that's going to be the biggest deal. So the most important thing for the Twins, all the guys are supposed to be good. If you look at their roster, you look at their lineup, and you look at their pitching, and you can say it could be really good, or it could be not so good if these guys fail. I mean, that's the most important thing. Everybody be really good. Everybody be who you're supposed to be. Then if that's the case, and you don't close games, then you're going to say, yeah, that was the biggest need for sure. So I hope that answers the question. Closer's the biggest need for them, I think, to be a contending team, as long as everybody plays like a contending team.
Right. Yeah. And that's the thing and that's why we focus on closer so much, is that's the thing they could bring in from outside the organization that would make the biggest immediate difference. Doesn't mean it's the most important position or that person would be the most important player on the team. How the rest of the roster performs as a whole is going to determine a lot more than that. What do you think about, now they bring in Nelson Cruz, obviously going to DH a lot, maybe play a little bit outfield, and they have Duda, they have Austin, they have Crone, and there's some other guys in the organization who might end up being useful bats. Save Astudillo can do a little bit of everything. Well, how do you see that playing out? Kind of the DH, first base, extra slugger on the bench kind of situation.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, and you're hitting on it again. And we don't talk about this about our subject matter, before we start the show, and here you are raising something that I've been thinking about. And before I answer that question, I mean, it's related to that is that the Twins were worried about being too right-handed. And so they brought in Lucas Duda, and they went from being overly left-handed, and they had to do something about that. They bring in Scope and Nelson Cruz. Now all of a sudden they're worried about being overly right-handed. But when you think about it a lot depends on Byron Buxton, whether they're right-handed or left-handed. And this is where Duda comes in, and it's where Sano's being healthy come back in. Because when you think about this, if Buxton is not doing it, if he struggles again, you've got an outfield that's left-handed Rosario, left-handed Cave, left-handed Kepler. You've got left-handed Castro, behind the plate, and all of a sudden against a tough left-hander, you've got good Marwin Gonzalez switch hitter, good Polanco switch hitter, good Scope right-handed, Crone right-handed, Cruz right-handed. So you protect those left-handed hitters a bit, but you're really not just overloaded right-handed until Buxton goes back out there in center field and becomes a strong right-handed hitter. Then you say, okay, now we kind of are right-handed. And by the way, I think being strong right-handed, there's nothing wrong with being. You'd rather be overly strong right-handed than left-handed. You'd like to have a nice balance, but if you're going to err on the side of right-handed. So I think they've done a nice job there. But again, just like everything else, I think a lot of that depends on how Byron Buxton does, and they have the ability now to play, Garver behind the plate against left-handers. Marwin Gonzalez can spell one of the outfielders occasionally against a tough left-hander, but the Sano's injury. I mean, that's another reason why Sano's injury is important, because Marwin Gonzalez is going to play third for him. It takes away their ability to spell Kepler against a tough left-hander, or Rosario if they want to periodically, because then if they do that, then they're playing a backup. They're playing one of their utility guys at third, which is fine, but it's just not a scenario that you like a lot. So those are the kind of things I think that a manager and front office, but a manager in particular, is thinking about. What are the different scenarios? What are the different combinations? And I'm not sure that they're totally right-handed. I think they've done a nice job until Buxton ascends, and I think they've done a nice job of evening it out. And I like the Duda acquisition as well. He's got a chance, and I think they need that to spell Crone or Tyler Austin or Nelson Cruz. I mean, Nelson Cruz 38. You're going to want to put somebody else in there, preferably left-handed, against a tough right-hander. Just give Nelson Cruz some games off. So I think all those things figure into it, and I think it's made it, to answer now your original question, I think it's made it tougher on Tyler Austin. You've got Crone that's already hit 30 home runs. If Duda continues to have a decent spring, I think he's going to make the club for the reasons that I just said, and it makes it a little bit harder on Tyler Austin.
That makes sense. Hey, we haven't talked music in a while. You listen to anything interesting these days?
I mentioned a while back, and I listened to it again the other day. There's the Marcus King band. I really like, and there's a song called "Homesick." People ought to check that out. It might be my favorite song to listen to lately. I really do like that. But you know what I heard the other day, and we've never talked about this guy, but I heard Alvin Lee in 10 Years After. I'd love to change the world. The old song from the 70s, and one of my favorites. And it just reminded me of what a great guitarist Alvin Lee is, and I just think it was a joy to hear that song again and listen to him. And I found another one I'm going to recommend to you and to our listeners. There's a live version of Alvin Lee doing "Going Home." The great remember the Woodstock and that great performance of "Going Home" that Alvin Lee did in Woodstock. But there's a live version of that, and you'd have to look it up because I don't know the album or anything, but it was done in France. I think it was done in Paris, and it's just basically he takes us through the history of rock and roll on his guitar as he does Going Home. So you hear everything from Buddy Holly and Bill Haley and the Comets to Elvis riffs on. I mean, it's wonderful. It's really, really good.
Cool stuff. Hey, I'm going to be in spring training for the next week. We're going to try to do a show while I'm down there, and we'll talk more about Roy's thoughts about spring training in general and maybe some of his favorite spring memories. We'll probably also, the way it works, we'll probably have some news developments from Twins camp and across baseball as well. I'll go to Roy for a final thought here. I do want to again thank Berry Coffee, berrycoffee.com. For home or restaurant or bar needs, whatever you need, coffee and places of employment. They can set up snacks and coffee and all kinds of drinks for wherever you are. Tony Hoagland, your State Farm agent in Champlin. Remember, SodaStick.com has some really cool Minnesota-themed baseball stuff. Check them out. And our promo code this week for Bite Squad is 10% off if you use the promo code hockey. Final thought, Roy.
Spring training has changed. It's different than now than it has been than it was for decades, and more different every year. But the push now in spring training is the feeling that the everyday players just need the last 2 weeks, and it's amazing to me how few at bats and how little the regulars play here for the first 3 weeks of spring training, and so that's been a trend that you started seeing it in Boston and Houston and Cleveland, and it's really become a trend, and it will be interesting to see how that plays out. I never thought about needing that playing a lot in spring training meant that I was going to get tired during the season. Maybe it did. I don't know, but they're pretty convinced now that people need to that they're going to take care of people's bodies all during spring training and right through the season. So I think that's one of the biggest changes and the biggest paradigm shifts in baseball that we've seen.
Interesting. We might talk about more of that next week. Thanks to Roy. Thanks to all of our listeners. We will talk to you next week, and I'll be in Fort Myers, and I'm not going to apologize for it.
Yeah, oh yeah, what condition I can